Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I am Lupita Aquino, and I have the honor, the privilege of speaking with Ingrid Rojas Contreras, the author of this wonderful book, The Man Who Could Move Clouds. And today I am talking to you from the Martin Luther King Jr. Library, a memorial library, and they are celebrating their 50th anniversary, and they have a whole bunch of events. I toured the space. It's gorgeous. And I just want to let you all know to come check them out and also check out their website for more events. And so I'm so super excited to have Ingrid join us, and she's going to actually do a quick reading for us. And there she is.
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm excited to talk to you. And of course, but I'm going to let you read first.
Oh, me too. Um, yes, I'm gonna. The Man Who Can Move Clouds is a story about, many things. One of the things that it's about is this amnesia, and an accident that my mother had, and when she was 8 years old, and through which she got amnesia. And then I had an accident in 2007 when I had amnesia. Um, when my mother had her accident, it was through that accident that when she recovered her memory, she started to see ghosts. And then she became a curandera. My grandfather was also a curandero. Um, and when I lost my memory, nothing magical happened to me.
Yeah.
But my family was very disappointed that that was the case. So I'm gonna read from this part of the book where I'm going back and forth between my mother's accident and then my accident. And I think it'll just switch one time. So her accident happened in 1956, and then mine happened in 2007. At the intersection, I got off my bike and stared, mesmerized, at the street signs. Madison, Halsted. Not only did I not recognize the names, it suddenly dawned on me. I had no idea where I came from or where I was going, what city I was in, what my name was, and I did not even know the year. Somewhere, somehow, this struck me as funny. Nay, hilarious. Was I laughing out loud? I half reached out to stop someone to ask them the year, and if they didn't freak out, maybe the city, but I pulled back in a giggle, thinking, this is life imitating, life imitating. I did not know how the rest of that sentence went. Then a man I recognized as the one who had just flung his car door in front of me passed me by, whistling in his coat and hat, walking a small white poodle. And a sentence popped into my head the way words sometimes do of their own volition, just pop into your mind. All good science fiction begins this way. It's a story where it was on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't focus because I was raging with electricity. I was air packed together in sheer consciousness. I closed my eyes. I gave in to the current. I exulted on the street corner. There was the noise of traffic, the bustling of people. I was euphoria standing in place. When I opened my eyes, how much time had passed. All appeared to be the same, people waiting, then crossing at the red light, cars going, cars idling. I feel so. There was nothing to do but wait for this wave of devotion to pass. Devotion to what? I closed my eyes. I feel so. I only knew the things my body told me, that there had been a before, a place where I had borne some unidentifiable weight, and that there was a now, a dizzying, unbounded place where I had laid my burdens down. You are now a blank slate, I told myself, then tried to remember what a blank slate was. An understanding settled on me like mist. It was the state of being born into the world, new and untouched by experience or time. A backstrap was digging into my shoulder. I considered the bag. It was white and worn, with little tinted stars. I knew it contained clues to my old life, so I took it off and strode to the trash can. I remembered that there was such a thing as the ocean. I would throw the bag away, I decided, go to a port, scam my way onto a boat and out on the water where no questions would be asked. I would continue living as a blank slate. I raised the bag over the trash. Then I made eye contact with a woman through a glass storefront. At lightning speed, I understood the glance I had just given her, non-committal, arrogant, I had given to myself. I was looking at my reflection in a darkened window. I was a woman. My hair was black and in disarray. I watched with astonishment as my own eyes, harried, unbelieving, wide open, communicated back to me every inch and ebb of what I was feeling. People walked around me, staring through me like I wasn't even there, like a miracle was not just unfolding before all of our eyes because it felt miraculous, the seeing of myself for the first time. I inched to the window. I examined my face, the thick eyebrows, the brown skin, the wide nose. What heritage is written on that face? South American, Middle Eastern, Caribbean? I had no idea. I ran my finger across my brow, caressed my own cheek, played with my hair. God, my eyebrows are so thick. I started to panic. It was proving difficult to remain a blank slate. I needed never to look at a mirror again, but it was addicting, seeing myself. I glanced, then looked, then gazed into my own iris. It was brown, and where light streaked in, caramel gold. What a strange fortress it was. I was patient and serene, wondering what key, what code might help me break the lock. Then, like turning a corner, I was terrified, choking. Air was mud stuck in my throat. Soon my mind would unhinge and open to madness. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw people crossing the street to avoid me. That was me, screaming. That was me, dropping to my knees, gasping for breath. That was me, a threadbare thing, fixing my nails into the crack of the pavement, latching on to a little piece of the world. Every day, Mammy's mother, Nona, sat next to Mammy's cot. Every week she clipped the growing nails of Mummy's fingers and toes, cut them out of stringy hair that fell over her chest. Mummy's father, Nono, cleansed Mummy's wounds, pulled the split skin that had puckered to lay it flat once more on her face. He plastered her skin with mashed petals and seeds and saps from trees and tinctures so it would heal without scarring. When Mummy at last opened her eyes, the dim light of the room assaulted her, but not more so than the strangers at her bedside, the young boys and girls and pregnant women who she did not recognize, who looked at her with such alarm and repulsion, Mummy at once feared what they saw. Her hands flew to her cheeks. Her fingertips met with soft pads of gauze. Her whole face was wrapped. The little boys pressed Mummy's hands down against the bed, imploring her not to touch anything, and the pregnant woman with her bulging stomach crowded what little space Mummy had. Mummy kicked and wept. She screamed for a mirror and for answers. Who were they? What did they want? Why were they holding her captive? She screamed until she passed out.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing. I love when authors read because I feel like it just kind of, you read it in your own voice, but when you have an author read to you, it just brings this experience to the book that is extremely special. So thank you so much for reading.
You're welcome.
Before we kick into talking, I want to ask you how you're feeling. For those that don't know, your book just got shortlisted for the National Book Award that is hosted by the National Book Foundation. The way I describe it to people, it's like the Oscars, but for books, right?
Yeah.
It's a big deal. So you're a finalist. How are you feeling? How's it going? And most importantly, like where were you when you found out? And what was
Yeah.
that like?
I was still sleeping and my phone was next to me and it just kept buzzing and I was just not interested and I was not going to answer the phone because I was just very committed to sleeping. And my partner came over and looked at the phone and he just shook me awake and he was like, I think you want to get your phone right now. And then my editor was calling and I answered it and then my editor was just screaming. And I just had no idea what was happening, but I knew that it was announced, it was going to be announced that day. Um, and so I, put two and two together, and then we were kind of screaming together. Um, and it was, yeah, I was like in bed when I found out. I like called my parents as soon as I got off the phone with my editor. Um, and they were super surprised. It's like one of the, and they were very happy. It's like one of the things that I didn't really have to explain to them because like in the name, National Book Award, like I don't have to break down what that means, because they're Colombian, and they're not familiar with the literary world at all, and they're always kind of confused about what it is that I do. But they got it immediately, and they were just like super, yeah, super happy. Yeah, they were very excited. It was very cute.
So can I ask, and for those that don't know, that haven't started your book yet, you do talk about the fact that your mom didn't want you to write a book, and that was kind of some tension there. How
Yeah.
is she feeling with the news? And yeah, roundabout way of me asking, how's your mom doing with this?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I think initially, she didn't want the story told. I don't know. I think because she had always felt that maybe like the world, I don't know, people weren't ready to know about curanderos, or that if you talked about curanderos, they're people who are like traditional healers, and they have a lot of plant knowledge. And they, also do things like, talk to ghosts, and do exorcisms, and, all kinds of things. And the man who could move clouds is my grandfather. People said that he could move clouds. Um, so she was always, she always felt that those stories should be kept secret. And growing up, I just wasn't sure if it was about respecting tradition or keeping tradition secret, or whether there was, or what was the reason. And I think as I started to just wanting to write the book, um, she had that gut reaction of like, oh, we don't tell these stories to anybody. Like we shouldn't tell these stories to anybody. And as I started to kind of talk to her about that and what she meant by that, um, we started to figure out and to see that there was an element of shame, or just an element of fear of how people would react. Because these are, traditions that come from indigenous lineage, and we're mestizos, so we're like half, um, you know, we're just, that that what happens with colonization in South America, where you have like this mix of people who are like half Spanish, half indigenous. Um, yeah, and then I think once I started to talk to her about how much I loved the stories and why I loved them and why I thought that they were powerful, and also that I thought that there was an element of shame, and just I just kept asking her like, who is the silence protecting? Like if we don't tell the story, like who are we protecting? Or who is kind of like comfortable if we don't say this story? And we figured out that maybe it was just protecting colonization, and it was just protecting, I don't know, these stories like not being part of, um, what we hear normally. So yeah, so through the writing of the book, she then kind of came around and just got super excited about me writing the book. And I think that she's always, with anything that I write, she's just always has like a one track mind, and it's about movies. And she just wants to know when the movie is going to be done and who is going to play her. Like those are the two things that she's
that
excited. Yeah.
That's exactly what we want to hear, though, right? Like, I mean, because I think that, when I think about your book and I think about my own history with the stories that I know that I've like orally been told to us, right? There is a lot of shame in saying, like, if I share this, no one will believe me. Or if I share this, this is what people will assume of me, right? And so, did
Yeah.
you personally, as you were writing this story, have to deal with unpeeling any of that shame other than your own moms?
Yeah, I there was, I think for me it was, when I had the accident and I got amnesia through that, um, I understood that it was that we all experience the surreal in different ways, and then I started to understand the book as it's a book about that's nonfiction and that's trying to document surreal experiences that we have had in my family, and that maybe many Latinx people will see themselves in those experiences as well. So I think once I started to understand it that way, then it was a way for me to step even out of the framework of shame and just kind of put it in a different language. Um, but one of the magical things also that happened with amnesia was that as my memories started to come back, it was the second chance of getting to know myself and getting to know what my life had been. And in that second hearing of what my life had been, I could almost hear the book being written. Like I could almost hear, it was like I could hear the story without judgment. I could just hear, I think before when I thought of my grandfather and I thought about this idea that he could move clouds, it was kind of wedded to this silence that I couldn't tell anybody. And I couldn't find a way to separate those two things. But through amnesia, the silence part somehow got lost in how I remembered myself. And so I just remembered the stories and I didn't remember that I was supposed to not tell the stories. So, so I just remembered everything about my family. And then it was, some weeks later that I remembered, oh, my mom had said we don't tell these stories out loud to anybody. But by that point in my life, I already had told people. And then I saw that nothing happened. And then I was like, oh, like what was this? What was the silence about? And like why were we ever made to feel shame around these beautiful stories?
And as you were basically thinking about the exact moment that you decided you wanted to write the story, right? And you wanted to let the public read it, like, what was that moment if you had any? Hi.
Sorry, that's my kitty.
That's a-
Wait, what was the
oh, sorry.
moment?
Yeah, what was the exact, do you have an exact moment that just sparked this, like, okay, I'm going to put this on paper? And it sounds like, because it sounds like the amnesia gave you that freedom to say, I'm okay with telling this, right?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think it was probably after when all my memories had come back. And I was just sitting in the aftermath of having gone through the accident and having gone through that period where I didn't remember myself or remember anything about the world, and then went through that kind of phase of reabsorbing memory. It was then that just sitting and just how strange that whole thing was. And then thinking that it had also happened to my mother. I think that's when I was like, well, that's definitely something that I want to write. Um, and I think with everything in the book, I was just encountering or maybe collecting experiences that just refuse to be pinned down, easily. So I think when we talk about amnesia, it's this state in the brain where you remember some things and you don't remember others. And the way that memory comes back is weird, and it's not kind of like logical and organized. And it feels like you're in the borderlands of experience is what it feels like to me. And when people tell me stories about, I have a lot of people in my family, and I interviewed a lot of people in Colombia as well about ghosts that they had seen, or just, experiences of that kind that they had seen. And to me, that also seems to be at the same borderlands. So for me, that just became like such an interesting project to bring to nonfiction, and to think about like what is our experience of the surreal, and what language do we put to that, and what does that sound like if I try to make a narrative out of it. But I will say that I think my family does seem to have like an experience of the surreal, maybe like more so than many others. I think I have to open the door for my cat. Hold on. I know.
No, it's totally okay. This is live, this is what happens. This is reality, Clearly, you
Yes.
guys are in my living room right now. It's gorgeous. But just kind of going into the conversation about, going back to the conversation about your mom, I'm curious about if there were any boundaries that you had to establish about what you would and wouldn't write about. And
Yes.
more so, if it ever crept into your creativity, in writing the book.
Yeah. The things that she didn't want me to write were specifics about, what is done, you know, I think there's like there's a story, for example, where she's talking to my grandfather and my grandfather's visiting her and it's he would die in a few months, and it's like the last time that they saw each other. And he was there because a farmer in Bogota had hired him and had flown him over to fix his farm. And this is something that happens in Colombia, where if a farm has like it's economically it's not doing well, or like the animals get sick, then a curandero might be called over to fix the farm. And so the my grandfather came and he was giving plant medicine to the cows, who all had some kind of bacteria, and then he um, was it was also an area that was patrolled by the paramilitary, and so he was like making these little satchels, which my mother described as like satchels of disorientation, and then he was burying them around the farm. And the purpose of it was so that paramilitary couldn't find the farm, or like they couldn't kind of like come close to it. um and so she did, in conversation, tell me what was in the satchel, and then when I was writing it, she was like, but you're not allowed to say what was in the satchel. So it's kind of like if there are like specifics of things that have been passed down, then those things are the things that she says. That I think that's the boundary of like this. You can't tell that. Um, yeah,
That must have been really important for you to have, and for your relationship, because, I love the way that you documented basically the ways in which you co-wrote this in some sense, right? You wrote this and then you would call her and tell her,
yeah,
this is what I wrote each chapter. That way she would okay or not okay. And I thought I was so, I haven't read anyone do that before for a memoir.
yeah. I guess because I think in this memoir, I felt that a large part of the story wasn't mine. There's parts of the story that are mine, but so many of the other stories are about family members and they're about my mother. And so I think in that sense, I don't know, when we think of creating a record of a story, then I personally feel that I have to get permission in order to feel okay doing it. Um, and yeah, I also think that having a conversation as I was writing, that it made the process richer, because sometimes she would tell me the story one way and I would write it that way. And I would have a question about a detail, and then it would just kind of, I would call her back with it, and she would then go into a kind of a deeper telling of it. So I found that writing the book and talking to her and having this cycle of writing and talking to her and writing and talking to her, that it allowed for me to bring in a lot of sensory detail, a lot of, yeah, richness that I wouldn't otherwise have found.
I mean, I think about how vivid your book is. Like, you literally like it's just scenic. Like you feel like you're right there, and And so, in terms of research, I want to let everyone know I'm actually in the People's Archive at the, Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library. And so they showed me this room where, they have archives that only staff can go in, but you can make an appointment. And it just made me think of your book and how, your research for this book. You went to Colombia, you interviewed people, and I was wondering if you could talk to us about that research and what it felt like to have that archive right in your hand that you talk about in your book that just disintegrates. And I
Oh
told
my
one of the staff
God.
here, and they looked at me like, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was horrible. Yeah, I was doing this. I at some point I really wanted to have a family tree. Um, and in order to be able to, I think I was just trying to gather facts of the story that I was telling. So when I first told my mother that this is what I was going to do, she was like, "You're not going to find that information. Like Colombia is not the United States. That's not going to happen." Um, and I said, "What are you talking about? Like I know that there's a baptismal registry, and I know that everyone got um, baptized because of, socially, culturally, you do it. So I was like, definitely, like the information will be there." Um, and she was saying like, well, some people were born in the house, and like I don't know that they would have gone anyway. So I, was just very stubborn. I was like, I will find the information. I'm going to show you. I got to the baptismal registry, and it was this little room, and then people go there all the time to get registries because they want to get divorced, or there's a new birth, or someone's getting married. And I was just there asking for old books, and I found my parents very easily. I found my grandfather and grandmother very easily. I found my grandfather's parents. And then that's when I couldn't work my way up anymore. And one of the things that happened for both parents is that they were children who were born out of wedlock. So they were like bastard children. And the they only had the women, the mother's last name. And the way that it's set up in Colombia, because we use like the a two last name as a single last name, it became very difficult to find the thread above. I couldn't even find the mother. So even the way that the system is made is just it's making it easy to find the names of the fathers and not the names of the mothers. So that was a problem. And I just kept asking for like older and older books, and I just kept writing down names that I thought like, well, that was a name that I saw, like, that I saw that a cousin had. Maybe that's a name of, I was just, trying to just making a web of information. And at some point I asked for an older book that they had, and it was one of their oldest ones, and they brought it out to me. And I, like opened the flap, and I was just looking down, and I remember seeing this very beautiful, bright red and black calligraphy. And I held the book and I tilted it up to look at it closer, and the whole kind of block of pages slid down. And then as I was like looking at it, because of the angle, it started to like it was like it was water, like the page grain disintegrated and then just started to kind of like roll on itself, like how you see a wave starting to kind of form. And then I just tried to put it down very quickly, but it was like too late, and it just like the whole thing disintegrated. Um, and there may have been like a few pages that were like left in the back untouched. So I put down the book. I was shocked. I like breathed a bunch of it in. um, the woman came over, and she was like she acted like it wasn't even like nothing had happened. She was like the keeper of the books, and she said, well, what do you expect? It's like an old book. And then she turned closed the book and then took it away and then put it back where it was supposed to go. And then I was just sitting there stunned. But yeah, it's like a very humid, very hot um, city. And I mean, obviously there's no weather control. It was just a cabinet. It's an old book. Um, yeah, and I just remember just being devastated by the feeling that all of those names had just been lost like that so quickly, and all of that history had been lost. But it really kind of became a way for me to talk about how so much of this story refused to be in the traditional places where we try to look. So even when in this part of Colombia, in colonization, um, there wasn't, a careful documentation of like the indigenous people of the area. Um, and there's just like not a lot of written down history, but there are a lot of oral stories and there are a lot of oral histories and then traditions that are passed down. So it was just kind of a book that just asked me again and again to think about alternate ways of thinking about reality.
Sorry. For me, sorry, I'm here. For me, I felt like, I really connect to that because I thought about how my mother, like, we don't really know when her birthday is because, she was born at home and then her father, who, was an alcoholic, had to go and register her somewhere, right? And
Mm,
so the day that she was born is not the day that she is registered. And so she
mm,
basically has two birthdays. And I just thought about how, we really can't trace back that, like our lineage, like you said.
yeah. Yeah, no, and even when I was looking at this archive and I was looking at older books, there was even a note by a priest at some point, I think in the like ni 1920s maybe, where it was just a note that was saying like civil war has broken out, and so I haven't baptized a number of children, or I have baptized, but I have not written down who they are. And then it just went into a historical account of what was happening in the area. Um, yeah, so yeah, I think that and I don't know, when you live in precarious situations or precarious places, or places that have like a history of precarity, that oral histories kind of become the history.
Definitely. That's definitely something that just came to me while I was reading your book. Just like, the just reassurance that for a lot of us, it's like that, right? Our
Hmm.
histories are not the only way that we have them is in orally, like we hold them
Hmm.
inside of us. And so, I mean, at any point, is that, I'm assuming that's what you felt like you were doing when you were capturing your own family story in the book.
Yeah. And I started to think, because I think one of the things that was happening in the background of this is that I had read Nabokov's Speak Memory. It's like his memoir. Have you read it? Have you read it? And there's a point in the book where he very easily just talks about, I think, 7 generations back, and it's because he was from an aristocratic family, and so I had like this like stark contrast of, oh, like the right people are in the record, and if you're like not part of the aristocracy or part of the people that matter, then you're not in the record. um and yeah, with the whole book disintegrating, then I just started to think about the stories that we carry, and I was just thinking about how my mother knows specific stories about my great grandmother and like the great great grandmother. Um and there's it's just kind of like single line stories, but at some point there was like like a foremother was living in Ocaña by the time that Bolivar came through, and there's this story about how she borrowed a dress from someone and like went to the party to meet Bolivar because all of the women were like very excited. And she said that he was very ugly, but somehow very charismatic, and all the women were kind of like confused by it. And then there's this like description of the dress, how it just had like this tail and how it like fanned like a bird's tail. Um, and and so then I just started to think about how beautiful it is to have knowledge of a personal moment that has meaning of someone that you come from, and how maybe that is more valuable than having like a diagram of names, or and I think that it was with that spirit that then I wrote the memoir, thinking about the stories that are passed down, stories that are begun in one generation and then continue in the next generation and are finished in the third generation. So I was just really thinking about just that long time. I was thinking about what we inherit in that way, and like even the things that we wish we knew and we don't know, and how that's also like a type of inheritance.
Definitely. And I think another thing I really connected to, which is really funny, is you center, and we're talking. I want to ask you about the structure because you center it around the unearthing of your nonos, your grandfather's bones, right? And so you start with a dream in the very beginning, and then the book is split into this big thing that you and your mom and her sisters are going to go do. And it's funny because we kind of did the same thing when so my grandfather died, my grandmother died first, and so
Mm.
we wanted to bury them together, so we unearthed her. And for
Mm,
me, I was like, okay, so I'm normal, like this is normal,
I love that.
but you know what I mean? Like, so
Yeah.
I want to talk about the decision to center it around that, and I mean, I want to tell you my story because I'm here too.
Yeah, no, I'm here. I want to hear all about the story. Um, yeah, so I think it was, uh, around the time that my aunts found out about the amnesia. They had two of my aunts and then my mother had like the same dream in that week, and the dream was that my grandfather came to them and he said, "I want to be disinterred." And this was also around the same time where I had told my mother, "I want to write a book about us. I want to write a book about my grandfather and like you, and I want it to be like three generations." Um, and so yeah, so when the dream happened, uh, because it had happened to three people, then we said, this is kind of like a peer-reviewed dream, like it's a special dream, and we need to listen to the errand that's being given. So we, got tickets, and there was, I think to me, while it was happening, there was something about the nature of that, of receiving instructions in a dream and then buying tickets and going to Colombia to unearth my grandfather, because that's what he has said in three different dreams. That felt like the beginning of a story to me. And so even before arriving, I felt that this story would just be about the unearthing, and that I wanted to end with whatever happened after we unearthed him, which, we didn't have any plans. Um, and as I was writing, I was just thinking about what unearthing means, what it means to bury something and what it means to bring it up. Um, and I, it's a book that's about, inheritance is kind of like, unearthing. Um, and it's a book about recovering things. Um, and so as I was writing, I just thought that I would do like a literal unearthing, like we're unearthing a literal body. And then for the middle of the book, what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a metaphorical unearthing. So I wanted to kind of recover or uncover a lot of the stories in our family that, as I was saying before, we're like shrouded in the silence, like we're not allowed to tell because we don't know how people are gonna judge us or how they're gonna react. Um, and which is like a very old kind of, yeah, fear that comes from colonial times. Um, yeah, and so I think that's how I found my way through the book was just thinking about digging things up metaphorically.
I love that you said that because I think, so much of it is that, right? Is this like metaphorical and physical unearthing that you go through with your family? And I think one of my favorite parts is you just kind of going with the vibes, like, it just felt like so me, like you're just like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know where we're going, but we're going to go here and we're going to go do this. And I just love that you wrote it from that perspective. And I was wondering if you
Yeah.
could talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, what came to mind when you said that was I mean I think that is how, yeah, what my role is maybe in the family. When we got to the cemetery and we're with my aunt and my cousin and it's me and my mom and we're there to disinter, my grandfather, and we're like at the bottom of the hill where he's buried. And then my mom brought like this little bag of sulfur, and she's like, we have to coat the inside of our shoes with sulfur because of um there's like um what does she call it, like ghost larva, like cemetery ghost larva. And we were like, well, we don't know what that is, but okay. we just like we're like dusting our shoes with this. Um and yeah, I think that just kind of captures the spirit of what it is, where um there's, I don't know, like if you, yeah, have a curandera in the family and they say that there's some ghost thing happening, you've seen enough weird things in your life where you're just like, I don't know what this is, and I don't know even how to question what this is. I'm just gonna do, what I'm told. And that's what's going to happen. But yeah, but there was something so magical about then meeting, seeing my grandfather's bones. I thought that I would be scared. I don't know how you felt about the unearthing that you had, but I had like this, it was actually like this very eerie but like very strong sense of connection, or just, yeah, being kind of in communion with the past in a way that was very different. And yeah.
Um, I thought I was going to be scared, and I was going with the vibes, just like you. I was going to say goodbye to my grandfather, and it was funny because I ended up being the person that actually they asked, once they unearthed her, who's going to move the bones over to my grandfather's casket. And so somehow me and my cousin were the ones to do it. And so I held my grandmother's skull. And mind you, I never got to say goodbye to my grandmother because,
Yeah.
we were here and we were undocumented. And so we couldn't say goodbye. And so it
No,
just felt like I thought I was going to be scared, but I was just like holding her and I was just like, it was peaceful.
yeah,
It
it's
was, and it's
peaceful. It's
so,
like so different. You're just like you're like, oh, this is a person like you have in that moment, that, yeah, that connection to them.
it's like you almost have that closure too, right? And
Mm-hmm.
there is this like, and it's hard because I've like, I don't think I've ever told anyone that story. So I
Yeah.
mean, now I'm a lot of people know this story, but your book, I just felt like, that connection and that, that legacy and that moment, just it felt so real to me.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah, that's how I felt
And
too, just seeing this.
And so just kind of like going off of that, I know we have a few minutes left. Oh my God, I should ask if anyone has audience questions. I'm here just talking to you and like vibing with you, and I don't, and like, oh my God, we have so many questions. Okay, should I go ahead? I'm gonna go ahead and then I'll fold in my questions too, because I'm not done asking you all these questions. Okay, so we have a question. It says, I'm curious about how your process for The Man Who Could Move Clouds was different from Fruit of the Drunken Tree? What was that switch like from fiction to nonfiction? That's a great question, by the way.
Yeah, I think it was very different. I think of fiction as a problem of abundance where there's too many options. I start to write a story and then I almost become paralyzed with how many different ways I can write it, like all the different points of view, like all the scenes that I can make up. It's just like the problem is that it's abundant. And with memoir, it's like a problem of limitation where you have everything that has happened is what the story has to be. Like that you can't pull from anything else. And it's a very kind of very different problem creatively because I would get to get to a part of the book where I knew that I wanted a certain feeling, or I wanted to um, write about an emotion in a particular way. And, my fictional mind would kind of like reach for whatever that scene would be, like what equivalent I would write in fiction. And I just kind of kept feeling frustrated because I was like, well, I don't have that. So how do I create it? Um, so I think it became really fun. And, limitation can be really fun, but I started to kind of reach for sometimes it's just a lot of poetic language to kind of try to hold the feeling of what I was writing about, or just histories that felt alternative. Like at some point, I go into the history of how the mirror was made and how the mirror was kind of created. Um, and all of that just felt really fun. So they both feel, like you can lose your mind doing it because it's so difficult. But it once you kind of get into the problem and you start to come to the solutions, it just feels very exciting. Yeah, so very different problems. I love them both. I think I'll probably continue to do both for the rest of my life.
I love to hear that because I want to see both. So while we wait for another audience questions, in case, because I know I'm sorry, I've been just talking to Ingrid and totally forgot to let you all know that you guys can ask her questions too. But just on the subject of nonfiction, fiction, you write about magical realism, right? And I was like, yes, thank you, because I think you say a lot of really important things about our stories and the way that we tell
Mhm.
our stories and the realities that exist in our world as a culture of Latin people. And I think that when we're trying to explain that culture to others, it's hard to box in. And a lot of people just want an explanation. They want to say it's magical realism, but it's not that simple. So I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about that and your decision behind making this nonfiction and not moving into a fiction realm with it.
Yeah. I think there's one story specifically that I think exemplifies for me what this how it goes in South America. There's this old indigenous story about the wife of a chief who is having an affair, and the chief finds out, and he um, feeds her. There's different stories, but one version of the story is that he feeds her a meal, and then the meal are like the cooked sexual organs of her lover. And so she, has this meal. Later, she finds out what it is, and she's pregnant. Um, and so she just drowns herself in this lagoon with her baby. And the story is that she appears at the middle of a lagoon, giving prophecies to her people. Um, and in Santander in Colombia, which is like the northeastern part of the country where my family is from, there came to be all of these stories about lagoon women, who were, women who just kind of appear in the middle of a lagoon. And then the story is different, because the women are kind of like hungry spirits, and what they want is to lure people into the lagoon, and then they kind of like eat them, or somehow eat them, consume them in some way. And um, my great grandmother, no, my great grandmother, um, was knew the story, and then this is a very kind of violent time in Colombia, and also a time where women just don't have many freedoms at all. And so the women knew that this was a story about like, lagoon women, and they would hike into the forest, and then they would hike to lagoons that were like far away from their villages so they wouldn't be recognized. And then they would just go and bathe naked and just kind of swim naked in this lagoon. And if ever kind of a man came upon them, they would just pretend to be a lagoon spirit. And then the men are so terrified of lagoon spirits that they just kind of like would leave. But so for me, like the idea that there's an old indigenous story that then became a ghost story that then became real again is, that's what we talk when we talk about like that texture of culture that is very South American, um, and that feels like magical realism. I feel like that's what we're talking about. Like we just have a different relationship to story and myth and to ghosts. And so there's a way in which those things kind of fold back constantly into reality. Um, yeah, and I most people are familiar with that type of uh, story, or like they, if they hear that, they might just be like, oh, that sounds like magical realism. And the boom generation in South America were it wasn't an invention, but they were inspired by the culture. They were inspired by the culture, and I think that's a part that maybe people kind of like forget to bring to mind, that there's an origin for that, and this is the origin. So I really wanted to write a book that was situated in that texture and then that experience that's very South American, where the surreal just keeps folding back into reality, and ghost stories become real stories, and it's all has to do with the way that we're interacting with them, the way that we're carrying them, the way that we live through them. Yeah, and so I really wanted to see that in nonfiction, because it's what my family life is like, and I wanted it to. I didn't want it to put it in fiction. I wanted it to feel. I wanted to have kind of like a reflection. I really wanted to create my own mirror that I could see myself in.
That's amazing and wonderful, because you're right. When I think about it, I don't think you see a lot of our stories like that in nonfiction. So that's amazing. And sadly, we are almost out of time. I'm going to have one more quick question for you. But before we run out of time, I quickly want to just ask you, what are some books that you would say are in conversation with your book, either currently or maybe inspirations, just some, yeah.
I read Women Warrior by Maxine Hong Kingston is a book that I read and reread while I was thinking about like how I could write this book. Um, Wendy Ortiz, Bruja is another book, and that's she calls it like a dream noir. Um, it's like hard to figure out how to say that. But it's a book where you have like it goes back and forth between um her life and then what she's dreaming. And so that you kind of start to see this conversation back and forth. Yeah, and so I just, when we're talking about like that, the way in which South Americans like fold back what to like a North American might be like, that's like the border of what we considered reality. For us, like we like to actually fold it back and then it's part of reality again. Um, yeah, those were maybe the two main ones that I would say that come to mind right now.
Well, thank you for the book, Rex. And honestly, it was such an honor just getting a chance to talk to you. Yeah, I'm ready to like have drinks with you and like talk about all this other stuff too that
I
we'll
know.
talk about.
Yeah.
But we're running out of time. We ran out of time. And I just quickly want to say I'm rooting for you. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for this book. If you haven't read this book yet, go pick it up, please. And a huge thank you to DCPL, to the staff here at MLK Library who have helped coordinate this and make this possible. And thank you to those joining us. And of course, thank you to you for writing this book.
Thank you, Lupita. You're so amazing, and then you're such a beautiful community builder, and I'm so happy that we got to chat today.
Yes, and MLK has a YouTube channel that you could subscribe to. Just wanted to add that in, and everybody knows where they can find me on social media. It's at lupita.reads, and Ingrid is also on social media, so you can find her there too. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, DCPL.